Hello, and welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Network Podcast, where everyone belongs, especially those of you who think you don't. My name is Chris Grundeman, and I'm here with my illustrious co-host, Zoe Rose.
Cheers.
This is the Mike Haugh episode, and I know we're all going to have a good time. Mike is a 25-year veteran of the networking industry and is currently Vice President of Product Marketing at Glueware. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, would you like to introduce yourself further to the Imposter Syndrome Network?
Yeah, I've listened to a few of your episodes and I really love the content. From a who am I standpoint, the three kind of bullet points are network engineer or maybe a recovering network engineer at this point, product manager, a product marketer. There's so many kind of areas we dive into and we become specialists for periods of time. But ultimately, those are the three kind of themes that I've kind of, let's say, maintained in the last few years, especially here at Glueware. But I'm born and raised in the Chicago area. But now this month, actually, I'm 20 years living in Southern California. And as you mentioned, I am VP of Product Marketing at Glueware. So I'm 6 years here at Glueware.
Nice. That's awesome. That's a long tenure in our industry. And we'll get to that. I'm actually recording this from LA as well. I'm out in Venice right now, which is not normal.
That's very close to me.
Yeah, cool. So I want to start at the very beginning today and talk maybe a little bit about what was your first job ever? What was the first thing you got paid to do?
I would say I worked hard and worked in not very glamorous jobs all through, all the way up and through high school. And I think that those are the kind of things that make you appreciate like working in tech or having an office job. My first job I ever worked and got paid for was bussing tables at a country club. But, I've done landscaping, I've done construction, I've worked at a body shop. Let's say, I think my dad wanted me to work all those kind of, let's say, trade jobs and labor jobs to like push me into an educated career and like a professional career. And so I have to say, I don't ever really question him on that, but I think his motives kind of work because I certainly did probably every manual labor job you could do in my younger years.
Wild. Yeah. And then, so how did you end up in tech, right? So from that, I mean, obviously it sounds like you learned the lesson that you didn't want to be the guy, holding the shovel, but how does that translate and how do you make that jump into technology specifically?
Yeah. So my dad was in tech. He was in sales. So he worked for a company called Hamilton Hallmark and then became Avnet, but basically was selling chips like passive and active processors and microcontrollers and all that stuff. And so he, was in that realm, in that industry. And, he was off selling and he would be talking about it a lot. So I had that kind of, let's say just knowledge or a little bit of exposure through my dad and his job. And he was really from a pretty young age advocating that I become a field engineer, like one of these specialists that work with the sales guys. And he would sometimes take me to some of his friend's house. And like when this guy had a Porsche and, was doing really well. And he's like, look, you can have a really good and successful life if you pursue, engineering. So he was a pretty strong advocate of it. We also had computers in the house from when I was really young. We had like Apple IIe. And then one of his engineering friends helped us build a computer. So we built an IBM computer. And I was hands-on in computers from a very young age all the way up, even through high school and stuff like that. And when I went off to college, it was a pretty interesting transition because high school Mike wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be in the music industry. I was a, let's say mediocre musician, but I thought, well, I'll become a recording engineer or something, right? I think, who knows, all the music videos and influence you and you're like, oh, I want to go in the music career. But my dad really was pressing on, get your 4-year degree. And so I visited some schools and really was looking forward to the college experience. And my dad definitely pressed and said, if you get an engineering degree, you can buy any guitar you want. I think I was a line I remember him saying something like along those lines of, look, just get your engineering degree. You can do music on the side. And being from the Chicago area, there weren't really a lot of studios and music was a difficult path, I think, if you're going that route. And so I wouldn't say he killed my dreams because, he was supportive of me and my hobbies and whatnot. But, I went into electrical engineering and then, also had a computer all through work through college. And then an interesting transition happened because electrical engineering is an interesting major. And I was like doing low level coding, assembly language and learning programming languages. And I was really kind of questioning if I loved it or not, and I was kind of looking around at my peer group of engineers and I thought, I can't necessarily see myself programming, like doing low level coding of And I did enjoy some of the projects and everything. And I'd say I did pretty well in school. I learned fairly quickly, but I think we all start to have a sense of what we gravitate towards, right? What do we learn easier? What do we learn faster? And I got a little bit lucky that I was waiting tables in college and the restaurant closed. And so I say that lucky because it was like misfortune that turned into an opportunity. I came back my senior year and I worked for the Alumni Association. And I basically was doing like LAN administration. I was getting into more, networking. It was my first kind of real exposure to, besides dial up at this time. Again, this is like mid 90s. So besides dialing up into, American Online or something like that, I started doing LAN administration, and the office I was working in, or the building, we connected it to a brand new fiber ring. So I got into a little bit of campus networking and WAN, and saw my first Cisco router, and, had a full year of kind of doing networking work. And I even put up the Alumni Association's first web pages. I was coding HTML by hand back then. And so I started really appreciating engineering, but from a system perspective, and not so much a chip level, low level perspective. And so I think that really kind of launched my interest in pursuing networking. Although honestly, I didn't know there was even such a thing as a network engineer, like a WAN engineer. I was really leaning towards like the LAN administration. I thought Novell or something like that would be in my future. So that was kind of how it started.
That's an interesting point you make about the college career and then a failed job actually kind of directed your journey a bit. One question we get a lot we chat a lot with other people about is that the benefit versus the challenge of getting a college degree or a university degree, and how it affects your career or your ability to get a job as well. With your electrical engineering degree, do you think that was a huge improvement? I mean, it kind of sounds like a little bit, even if it didn't help you get a job, it helped you direct your path and identify what you like.
Yeah. So I think I would answer it a different way and just say, like, I don't think in today's day and age you need a 4-year degree. I think there are certifications, training. You can go off and build things. You can go learn on YouTube. I mean, the world is so incredibly open now with access that we didn't have that sort of thing. We didn't have that access. My main point, and when I talk to younger kids or my nephews and nieces and whatnot, the 4-year college experience, in my case, it was 5 years, but it was really important to me, let's say growing up, because in that age, right, I came out of high school like wanting to be a rock star. There's not really like a realistic path in life, although, some make it happen. And now we're touring on the same music 30 years later. No. That period of time to, I joined a fraternity. I grew up, I became responsible. I had to live on my own, cook on my own. I think the 4-year experience in like a college town or whatever is a tremendous experience. So I am a big advocate of that. I think hopefully that is still something that, people can afford and there's value in it. Where I think it lacks the most is that you come out of a degree program, in my case, engineering, and all you have to fall back on is like a class or a project. You don't have a lot of real world experience at all. And so, like to my nephews and things like that, I'm telling them like, try to get internships, try to get some real world experience, or try to get connected to the real world, because that's the big disconnect that I think the university life, if you're not doing something real, and in my case, I got to do real networking for the Alumni Association. And then when I went into the job market or went to my first career fair, I had another, let's say, dream or it's called fantasy, but a dream that I was going to move to California, which ultimately I did. But I had a project my sophomore year of high school where like home ec, where they say, what are you going to do in your future? And I said, I'm going to work for IBM. I'm going to live in California. And I made both those things happen, although they didn't happen at the same time. But anyway, I went to a job fair and IBM was hiring. And I thought, man, this is exciting. And so I talked to the recruiter. And while I was still my last year of school, I went back to, I was down in Southern Illinois. I went back up to Chicago and interviewed at IBM and talked to 3 hiring managers and got the word that all 3 wanted to make me an offer. Like it was my choice who I wanted to work for. And that was a really exciting kind of transition because like we were saying, how did you get started or where did you go? I think electrical engineering, or it was actually EET, got me in the door, like having that deep technical knowledge of down to chip level, low level programming. I mean, I could stare at, assembler logs or, low level stuff. But having the real experience, I went into network operations. I was a network engineer right out of school, and I worked in a network operations team. And having that real world experience and having a high degree of interest that I did self-learning even back then through books and other things really helped get me in the door. So I think a degree is really a mechanism to get you in the door somewhere, but you got to back it up with some level of tangible experience. If it's a project you did, an internship, a volunteer, whatever you can, get real world experience.
Oh yeah, when it comes to hiring from my perspective, and I'm hiring somebody, I look at degrees are great, and I would never say don't get a degree if you have the opportunity, but I always put it as optional. Generally, I see it as like a passing HR's interview. And that's the value of it. But when it comes to like, if they have hands-on experience, even if you said, doing projects, doing internships, doing like home projects as well. If somebody's done built a network in their home and can talk through, we did this or I did this and I did it this way because of that. And it's so valuable, kind of the self-propelled learning.
Absolutely. Show you can go into a situation and learn and adapt and implement, have successes and failures because, everyone is proud of successes, but, if you have had some failures, sometimes those are your biggest learning opportunities. And so, yeah, I think that experience kind of helped get me in the door. But, the title of the podcast was really intriguing to me, Imposter Syndrome, and when I started my career at IBM, it was pretty overwhelming from the get-go because at the time, not a lot of people maybe really understand it, but IBM Global Services operated one of the largest global networks in the world. We had a multi-protocol backbone, an IP backbone, the largest dial network in the world. And my particular group supported networks for companies like Sears and Discover Card and Allstate. These are major Fortune 500s that are, using the network for business. And in the case of Allstate, all the claims and processing and Discover Card, all the transaction services went over the network. So it was kind of getting thrown into the deep end. And IBM is another place where you're exposed to every single technology. I mean, we had Token Ring because IBM invented it. We had SNA, FIDI, X25, Frame Relay, ATM. People think networking now and it's all Ethernet and IP, but back then, Ethernet and IP was kind of like the minority of the protocols, right? It was up and coming and it was the future, but we were doing a lot of other things and it was kind of a wild place. And so this is another, let's say, recommendation I give to anyone I can, either mentor or advise in their young career is that the benefit of joining a large corporation like IBM is the training resources were incredible. I mean, nowadays you have YouTube and you have other things you can go learn pretty easily, but there was a little benefit that I learned about and then I just kind of abused, which was you could order any book and it was paid for. It was pre-Amazon, but basically, it was like a bookstore, and IBM had their own portal and everything, and you ordered whatever book you want. So I had BGP books and MPLS books, and actually MPLS wasn't out yet, but I had all these protocol books. I had just stacks and stacks of books growing, and that was how you learned back then. They're really, again, we didn't have what we have now. So staring into books and reading. And then the other big benefit of a company like that, they paid for any additional, let's say, class or coursework material you wanted, they paid for. So we had a nearby DeVry, a tech school. I took their networking course. In my very first year at IBM, I went through their, networking 101 and networking 201, whatever, the whole coursework at DeVry. And because I wanted that more fundamental education, because my engineering did not train me on networking. I wanted instructor led at the same time as I was a practitioner. And it was really cool because I was using the instructor as helping me solve my problems at work. And so I took those classes and, even was thinking about pursuing MBA, because again, you're always thinking, in my thinking anyway, I was like, how do you keep evolving? How do you keep progressing? And is it an MBA? Is it a master's? Because I think it's part of that whole, I don't call it imposter syndrome, but the feeling like I don't know enough. I'm not ready, And so at that time, I ended up talking to quite a few colleagues. That was another great benefit of a large company is I had incredible colleagues that had many years of experience, and most of them steered me towards the certification route. So coming out of those DeVry classes and doing a day job of troubleshooting and supporting networks, I went through the Cisco certs of CCNA, CCNP, and eventually my CCIE, which we can talk more about. But the cert path did help. I would say it was a combination of things: practical knowledge, a bit of formal training, and then the cert path to kind of, let's say, cover your bases and make sure like you're on par with what your peers know. And I was young. I was still in my mid-20s, and most of my peers were, quite a bit older than me that were doing it for a long time. But they had the disadvantage of they didn't know the new protocols. So I was kind of coming at this thing where IP and Cisco routers and BGP and MPLS all kind of net new. So they didn't really have a significant advantage, I would say.
Yes, that's interesting. I want to roll back a little bit. I mean, you mentioned, when you do some mentoring or helping folks along, early in their career, you talk about the benefits of working at a big company. And it sounds like a lot of those benefits are just in working around other smart people. So I wonder, how much has mentoring or sponsorship helped your career? I mean, have you had folks who kind of showed you the path along the way or taught you tips and tricks or even kind of, opened doors for you to go through or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my time at IBM really set me on a path for success because two things happened. One is I had excellent management. My first, let's say, kind of two primary managers were super supportive people who encouraged training, who encouraged anything extra I wanted to do, extra projects, anything pursuing areas of my interest. So having incredibly supportive management, when you have good managers, then later in your career, if you have managers that aren't as, let's say, about development and stuff like that, it's you can kind of compare. And the second thing was, as I was in operations, I was finding issues in productions. I was finding, vendor bugs, or I was finding misconfigurations. So I was interfacing with the test engineering group a lot because they're the ones who test and certify code and then provide guidelines and recommendations. And they kind of, let's say, put all the boundaries on the design folks. And one of the test engineers, his name is Bill Tarvin, I'll just name him in that, he became a tremendous mentor to me. He kind of took me under his wing and ultimately helped me, after a couple of years in operations, move into that test engineering group. So I was in IBM at the time, the youngest test engineer, and he and I worked hand in hand testing router switches, firewalls, load balancers, pretty much any piece of equipment that went in the network and any operating system and feature. And he also was on his path to get a CCIE and ultimately did. And then I followed in his footstep and did as well. So helping me on that path, the technical journey, the mentorship, and then I would say also even mentoring me all the way to, I would say, the top of my field at the time. I got my CCIE in 1999, January of 99. I think I was 26. The proctor told me I was the youngest. That I went to Halifax, Nova Scotia. We could talk about that, but I went to Halifax, Nova Scotia to take it. Actually, I went in December and didn't make it. I did well, but I didn't make it to day 2 at the time. Routing switch was a 2-day test. And then I went back in. My manager said, how do you do? How do you feel about it? I said, I know I can get it. There was things thrown at me on that one. I took too much time to work through. And so he said, sign up for the next available slot. Again, that's that supportive manager that was, encouraging me and making it available. And so, I went right back in January of 99 and passed. So that, I'd say those two individuals, a guy named Mike Selman, who was my manager, and Bill Tarvin, my technical mentor, really set me on a path of success in my career.
It sounds like your career has been like one after another, really, really, really great opportunities, great support, great guidance. But I imagine there's probably been a time where you felt, what next? Where do I go from here? Or maybe it was like a big mistake happened and then you didn't know what to do.
Yeah. There's been a few, I would say, some things are out of your control, right? So the craziest thing about this is that, I joined IBM, kind of fulfilled that dream. I said I was going to do it in high school and got that, so I'm, I don't know, something like 5 years into my career, and IBM sells my division to AT&T. So these are the things that are out of your control. So the whole network infrastructure and 5,000 employees of IBM Global Services pretty much overnight became AT&T employees. And a tremendous cultural shift happened. IBM is, I'd say, an organization of professionals. And AT&T at the time was more like an organization of, I don't know the right term, like I want to say not contractors, but like it was a different mentality. And there was power struggles. There was a lot of decisions made. The manager who was my, kind of, let's say, guy became very loyal to, he got shifted to another group. So there was a lot of churn and turmoil. And ultimately, I was, as all those things were happening in power struggles and management shifts, I was kind of pressured to move to New Jersey to continue to be a test engineer, but they wouldn't let me transition to a design engineer and kind of like, so I got kind of caught in okay, I don't want to do what you're asking me to do. You're not letting me do what I'm wanting to do. And I had a lot of options, I was certified and stuff like that. And so I started thinking I should consider my options. And this is, again, I probably should have considered a lot of options, but, an option kind of came to me in that I was in a test, had a job in a test lab, and it was full of equipment and full of test equipment as well. And I'll just say that, with the relationship I had with the folks who sold Cisco equipment and sold Juniper equipment and other things in the test equipment, I noticed, you can't help but notice these guys show up in Mercedes and Lexuses, and, like, okay, these field sales guys are doing pretty good, And one of the test companies, Netcom Systems, who just became Spirent, it was a kind of a holding company who had acquired a company called AdTech, made the AX4000, an ATM and frame test, and ultimately a protocol tester, and the Netcom, who made the smart bits. And the folks who represented those products said, any chance if you're ever looking, we would love to have a person like you at our company, right? I mean, it was really kind of, I think you feel very flattered when people kind of reach out to you and just say, if you're ever looking, or I know there's some churn going on, if you're ever looking to jump. And so that was kind of a fun ride, because they said, you know what, don't talk to us about it. We'll fly you out. The corporate offices here in Los Angeles and Calabasas. It's just inland from Malibu. And so they flew me out to LA for the weekend, let me stay the whole weekend. And then I interviewed on Monday. And it just was a really exciting company, a really cool culture. Everyone I talked to had this whole kind of work hard, play hard mentality. And I kind of identified with that. And so I made the move pretty quick. I jumped in and I joined as a sales engineer, still based out of Chicago and covering like about 6 states in the Midwest. And so I was super excited for this, right? And I was like, okay, and I got a big pay jump, right? But it's also, and this is something I talk to people about, is, your pay structure, what part is fixed and what part is variable. And like and back then it wasn't super common to get like tons of options and, pursue that. But, back then it was more like, what was nice about a sales structure is you got bonused based on sales in a more frequent, it wasn't a one annual bonus and it was all or nothing. So needless to say, probably long story long, it was an exciting kind of move. But all of a sudden, I make this move, and now my new job is I cover 6 states, and it's a lot of driving time. And I'm dropping into these companies, enterprises and service providers, basically anyone who was wanting any of this portfolio of equipment. And I had to present to them. I had to understand all the things they were talking about. I had to process it really quickly. I had to position our equipment. It was a difficult transition. And I was paired with a sales guy who was like a very old school sales guy. He got up and gave a quick pitch and then turned it over to the SE. And I was like, a few months into it, I thought, I'm actually doing all the selling. I didn't want to, not to downplay the role of sales, but when you're in a technical sales sell, you really got to show the merits of the product. And I would say I struggled a bit, and just because I went from deep in my own world of, IBM's networking and protocols and all the things I knew, to really broad. One day I'm talking to people who are making cable modems. The next thing I'm talking to Motorola, who's making cellular systems. And it just was really crazy, but it was excellent experience to get extremely broad exposure to what a lot of companies were doing versus what, one company was doing.
Yeah, that resonates with me. I definitely had the same kind of, for me anyway, gut-wrenching experience moving into that kind of systems engineer, sales engineer role, when all of a sudden, it's kind of a dog and pony show, and you are the dog and the pony. Yeah. and have to be kind of, smart on the spot, which is very different than, kind of maybe working through something when you're troubleshooting, even if it's, even if there's an outage and you're in operations and you're troubleshooting something and there's a stress level involved in that. But there's a very different thing in like walking into, especially, I did it in Manhattan, which I'm sure is similar to LA, where, these were some big offices we were walking into, right? These were names I knew of, folks who were very powerful and movers and shakers. And I'm the one who's supposed to tell them how it works, right?
So to bring this back a little bit full circle to a certain point, is that I got that first bonus check and I went out and bought a beautiful Taylor acoustic guitar. And I told my dad, like, he was right. Yeah. But this is the ebb and flow with sales, though, or sale is that we had a couple really good years, but then we kind of went into the tech downturn. And, at a mid-sized company, and I think large companies, this happens too, but they started, cutting, we were hiring, and all of a sudden you cut. And the sales guy I was working with, got cut. My territory, I was kind of a specialist in routing and all the kind of complex stuff. So they kept expanding my territory. I was covering like 15 states all the way out to Colorado. And so I was traveling a lot more. I would say I was working harder and making less, if, I kind of think about it that way, and thinking, oh man, like, I don't know how long I want to do this route, right? You kind of start to think like, I'm literally getting on a plane. And then, 9/11 happened right around, during that time, and made traveling a lot less. It was really difficult to travel, like, and I was carrying equipment oftentimes. And I'm like, oh man, I'm not enjoying this. I kind of got to a point where, and, the Midwest is not a very exciting territory to cover. I have to say, as I'm from there, but, going to Ohio or the Twin Cities or, whatever, it's just not the most exciting territory. So I was at a bit of a crossroads, and my old manager, the person I mentioned to you, who I was, really, really enjoyed working for, he said, hey, it sounds like you want to become a design engineer for AT&T. And I said, hey, let's make it happen. So I rejoined him. I had a nice couple-year run back at AT&T, but a different business unit. We were doing all the network design, and it was in the era of moving a bunch of large enterprises off frame and ATM to MPLS VPNs. And so I got really good experience, again, back under a great manager. And during that time, I had some personal opportunities, and I moved to Los Angeles on my own. So 2002, I made the move out west. And yeah, man, 2 years in, and AT&T kind of, let's say, went through the big company thing again. They're talking about mergers with Bell South, the management shuffle. I get a management change. I don't even know what's happening. And I was working remote. I wasn't going into an office. I was doing remote working before it was cool. But I just felt like really detached and like not enjoying it anymore. Barely talked to my manager. And to be honest, I was missing a bit of that going into the office thing, because those years at IBM, and even the years as a field engineer, I was always going into an office. I was always seeing people. You're always learning. And, I was kind of isolated doing network design and thinking, this isn't really that much fun. You just sit at home and do like design work all the time. So I wasn't loving it. And my old company, the test company Spirent, recruited me back to be a product manager. And this was a big shift, because I thought in my head, I was kind of thinking, well, you probably need an MBA to be a product manager. Like, I don't know how to market a product. I've worked on products. I know how to test them and troubleshoot them and do all this stuff, but I don't know anything about product management. And like, don't worry, all the protocols and stuff. You'll learn on the fly. And had a good team around me. And that Calabasas office I visited years ago, I now was working there. And I really did enjoy that office environment again. And just to compare and contrast, this was kind of waterfall development, because a lot of our stuff was hardware. So you did a lot of planning and a lot of development, and then eventually you got a product out. So I learned that product management, and again, just to try to draw into a little bit of my experience today, and that when you work on hardware products, it's a longer span of defined requirements, and then like a year later, you get to see it in action. It's not a quick reward, or you got to kind of things you wrote requirements for finally making into the product quite a bit longer. But it was a fun ride. We developed a brand new product, a new hardware product, an all new software product. We integrated and collapsed several product lines into one. It was called Spirent Test Center. And so I was part of the team that built and deployed and launched that. And I would say the most exciting thing was, as a product manager for a product sold globally, I traveled the world. I went everywhere. I filled, it was back in the day, you had your passport stamped, all the countries you enter and exit. They don't really do that anymore, but I filled my passport. I needed to go get extra pages in those first 4 years. And I was kind of living the dream, I would say, from my view of like where I was. Sometimes you don't know where you want to be, but like you have this thought, or like, I want to see the world, or I've never been to Europe, or, you have these things that run through your head. And I got to go everywhere, everywhere that had networks and bought, I wasn't going to Thailand or anything anywhere beautiful and cool. I was going to Europe and ended up ultimately going to China and India and all kinds of places. But traveling the world as a product manager was great. I enjoyed that too. So that was a really cool chapter in my life.
Yeah, that's one thing I love about things that I do is I get to travel a lot. My current role, I get to travel, but also public speaking, I get to travel. I think anybody that has that opportunity, for me, it's a really great opportunity because you get to learn different cultures, different personalities, different perspectives. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I guess fast forwarding a bit, your current role. There's a question we ask a lot of people, but I'm always fascinated by it. How would you describe your current role in like a day-to-day? What do you do essentially?
Yeah, my day-to-day is like as often as possible, I'm meeting with customers or prospects and I'm presenting them our newest. Oftentimes the sales or SEs aren't ramped up on the latest and greatest. And so I'm kind of airdropped in, via Zoom most of the time these days, but I'm presenting the latest and greatest on our product. I'm also gathering requirements. So although my title is product marketing officially, I'm becoming, let's say, 60% product management and a little bit less on the product marketing side. But so meeting with customers is a big part of my role. I do define product requirements and then work with engineering to build those. I kind of jokingly say I live in Jira these days. For those of you who work in agile businesses, like everything is in Jira. Everything's a Jira ticket. So I live in Jira. We have agile ceremonies and all that to go through in the release. And then where I'd say the more fun part of the job becomes around the product launch, like we're gearing up for right now, where I build the collateral. If it's solution briefs, demonstration videos, I do webinars, app notes, blogs, those sorts of things. So I would say those are a couple key things. And then some big rock things that happen throughout the year are events. So we do like Cisco Live. We do packet pushers, either in person or online. We do ONUG. In fact, the ONUG event is next week in New York City. So that's cool. One piece we didn't get to, but when I went into the product management role originally, when I traveled the world, I was also began presenting worldwide. So I was presenting at IETF, in a benchmarking working group. I was at the Metro Ethernet Forum, the MEF. I became a co-chair within ONF, who developed the Open Flow protocol. So I started getting, let's say, connected to the community of, let's say, the people who are the leaders and the ones defining the protocols and things that we use every day. And it's kind of wild because through going to those conferences and things, I met all those books that I had sitting on my shelf or RFCs. I met Radia Perlman. I met Event Surf. I met Yakov Rector, who wrote the BGP spec, Krita Kempeli, all these people who were kind of like mythical protocol gods, right? Or whatever you'd want to think about. I met all these people and talked to them and asked them questions and interacted. And so that was really cool. And in my job today with Glueware, we're not as big of a company where we can really, let's say, influence standards, but we do participate in ONUG. And ONUG, I kind of an unofficial co-chair of the orchestration automation working group. So that's really fun because Glueware is an automation orchestration company and we make pure software. I was kind of saying the difference between hardware and software. We produce a pure software product, and it's really fun to work within those communities like ONUG and understand what a lot of enterprise are facing, and then align our product with the industry challenges. And that's what the ONUG organization does.
Awesome. So it sounds like, part of what you love there is getting out there and being able to do these presentations, kind of educate people, tell the story. I wonder though, obviously, being in a product role, which you have been for a while now, but it's definitely a couple arms lengths removed from the keyboard in some ways, right? You're not configuring networks, you're not doing the operational side of things. Is there any part of you that, I guess one maybe misses that, or two, and I'll say this through my own personal experience, I definitely have found that as I've gone into, higher level roles, more management roles, more architecture roles, more entrepreneurial roles, that I sometimes wonder if I'm still as smart as I was in some ways, I guess. And I wonder if that happens to you too, if, not being able to be the one who's actually building the thing, if there's any, I guess, imposter syndrome there.
Yeah. I'd say the unique thing about my role, and I would say, Chris, I also was similar where there's been opportunity where I had upward movement in an organization, and it would have meant more people management and less technology. And I did have roles where I've managed people. And although I love the personal interaction, I actually really do enjoy the mentoring and had good experiences managing. I am more excited about the next new technology and working on those things. And because our product is so technical, in my role, I am demonstrating the product, and it is, we're still, let's say, configuring lower layer networking equipment. I mean, today, in the past few days, I've been testing APIs and looking at JSON structures and stuff like that. So I would say I've kind of fought that that disconnection from tech. But I would say the piece where I was, let's say, starting to get nervous was there have been some technology shifts. One was the shift to software. And I would say I was on top of that one. And, as things went virtual, I'm like, oh, okay, I understand virtual. But as things went to public cloud, and our product can be on-prem or in the cloud, I started having to talk a lot about AWS and public clouds. And I really was feeling like, oh man, I don't know it well. I haven't been hands-on. I haven't done a lot of it myself. And so I did take it upon myself to go and take coursework, study, and actually went and did this is part of, let's say, benefit of COVID and staying home during the pandemic or having more time at home, is that I set a goal for myself and I went and got the AWS certification. So I think there's areas where you're fearful to be disconnected from the technology. And then you just have to ramp up kind of quickly. And like containerization is another big trend that, I had to kind of wrap my head around and really understand containerization and Kubernetes and those sorts of systems. And so I look forward to kind of jumping into a new technology, immersing myself, and coming out on the other side with having a good understanding. And I'm actually pretty good at being able to take what I learn and turn around and teach or present. And so that was something, it took kind of years to develop, because I'd say I still get, depending on the audience and how well I'm prepared, I still get a little nervous or still feel a little uncomfortable. However, when I get rolling and I just get back into it, then I can kind of overcome that. But I've been making an effort to stay connected to the technology, I would say.
Yeah, for me, that's the same. I have to make that effort because otherwise it's so hands off at this point. I have a question about, so I see you have quite a few, I'm assuming those are guitars. I can see the top bit behind you. So I imagine the career is going well. One question that I had from a personal perspective is salary negotiation is very stressful for me. I don't like doing it. I find it absolutely rubbish. Possibly because I'm rubbish at it. But how do you approach that in your career? Has it ever been like you just accept whatever's offered, which is what I used to do all the time, and it's probably a bad idea? I have changed. Or is it something you actively focus on how to do that in an appropriate way? And is it ever a struggle?
Yeah, that's a really good one, because, when you think about your career and when I got that first offer from IBM, there was no negotiation. I'm like, I'll take it. But then when I was making a transition and, when I made the first move to Spirent, there was a little bit of negotiation. I mean, I think I was pretty happy with things, but I looked at things like vacation time or other, you try to look at, is there any wiggle room on options or whatever? So you look to see if there's anything that you can do. What I'm not good at, I will say, is that once you're in a role, and I'm a heads down worker, I'm going to go and work as hard as I can and do what I can for the company. And most cases, I've been rewarded for that, where they see your effort and they give you that whatever maximum increment, or they do what they can to try to keep you happy. And so I don't ask for it, is what I would say. I'm not good at going and asking for it. But I was at a role where, the company wasn't, the company was doing okay, but we weren't getting the annual bonuses and we weren't getting salary increases. And I was kind of stuck in that plateau and I was working really hard. And I'm thinking, I don't feel like I'm being treated fairly. I got that feeling. And so ultimately it led to, when there was, again, some management shifts, I made a move. And so I tend to make, let's say, restructure a salary or an increase in salary when I make a job move. I will say at Glueware, I actually took a lower salary with a higher variable pay. And 3 years in, I got hired in as a director. I had come from a smaller company where I was a vice president. I got my first VP role. I'm not super hung up on titles. I will say when I got my first director role, I was proud of hitting that, because early in my career, I thought that's the level I want to hit. So I got to a director level. And then when I went from a bigger company to a smaller company, I got a VP title. And then when I joined Glueware, I got bumped back down to a director level. And I wasn't upset about it because I don't get too hung up on titles. But about 3 years in, again, I was doing everything, working hard, speaking at conferences. I kind of became the voice of Glueware externally, right? Anyone who knew Glueware knew me through packet pushers, through Onug, through this, through that. And the co-founders, I remember how informal it was, or kind of unique it was. It was just after I presented at a conference, they took me to dinner and they said, "We're promoting you to VP." And it was like just verbal, like, okay, like, what is that? Okay, cool. Like I respond well when the company recognizes your performance and gives you that bump or increment along the way. If I would say to anybody, if you're kind of stuck into something where you're going, more than a year or 2 years, you're not getting an increment, then you either need to put some pressure on it or you need to think about make a move. And it's hard to ask. I think it's an awkward conversation, but I think if you need to know your worth, and that's a difficult thing to do. But now with things like, I was at Open Door, Glassdoor, or something like the Glass, I don't know the websites, but you can kind of get a sense of what you're worth in the industry.
Yeah. I think even LinkedIn now is doing some like salary guidance stuff. And yeah, it's much easier than it used to be. And I agree with you 100%. I think knowing your worth and being willing to ask for it. Because again, in my experience anyway, if you ask for more, they'll just tell you, "Hey, I can't afford that, but here's what I can do." I've never had anybody really be offended by asking for what I thought I was worth. I definitely took me a long time to get there, but then once I started asking, I realized, oh, this is not actually a big deal.
I have had one situation. A recruiter. I was chatting to a recruiter who had reached out to me, I must say, and he told me I wasn't worth what I was asking, and I was like, "Oh, really?" Because I knew I was asking a very low amount for what I could have asked, but I realized that he had no idea of what my CV was, or I guess you guys call it a resume, and he had no idea what my qualifications were. He didn't understand the industry he was trying to hire for. So I did have a situation, but context-wise, he was just silly.
We'll take the one bad one with all the good ones. Unfortunately, we are about out of time for today. Thank you for joining us today, Mike. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your story with the Imposter Syndrome Network. This has been great. To all the imposters out there listening, we know that your time and attention are the most valuable things you have, and we really appreciate you spending them with us. Thank you. Also, if you haven't already, please feel free to join us on LinkedIn. We have a group for conversations about all things related to our careers and lives and technology. One thing, Mike, before we go, I am curious, through this career, it seems like you have kind of, maneuvered fairly well through it. And so I'm curious, how did you figure out what you're good at?
Yeah, I mean, I think it ultimately comes down to, are you able to learn something quickly, or is it just, are you struggling to comprehend it? And I'll just give you the example that, like when it comes to programming languages, I don't really like staring at code and really trying to figure out programming structures and things like that. So I would just say, like, while I could struggle through it and I could get it, the effort was higher than what it was like worth to me. And when I started studying, networking and protocols, and even now I'm studying APIs and things like this, I understand it like quickly. And I think it's just trying to get a sense of how well are you processing it. And if you can get over the hump of just, understand, like once I really dove into cloud, I learned it quickly. And there's a lot of parallels to all the physical world. So I could take that base knowledge and build off it. So the areas where I didn't think I was going to be good and I became, better at it than I thought was on the presenting side. And I think just a benefit I had was sitting through so many presentations, knowing what's good, knowing what's bad. And then I mentioned that mantra, like, work hard, play hard. But for the last quite a few years, it's tried to been, how do you work smarter? And trying to follow, I try to look for things either in the media, like I really like the packet pusher guys. You might know the interviewer, Tim Ferriss. He does great interviews and stuff like that. He's one of my favorite podcasts, or Joe Rogan. And you can try to pick some people that you look towards and try to emulate what you like about their style and their technique. And I'd say that's really helped me because, I produce material, but I go out and look at competitive material. And if it's better than mine, I'm like, I need to do a better video. I need to do this. And so I think it's a little bit of that competitive nature also. Wanting to learn and having a little bit of that competitive fight is what really kind of motivates me, and it steers me towards the things that I want to learn quickly and can learn quickly.
Great. Thanks. Are there any projects you're working on or involved in that the network should be aware of?
Well, on the company front, we have Glueware Release 5 coming out, which is really exciting. We're building off our process automation that we've introduced. We also have a new topology solution that's part of our suite. So those are the things I'm kind of most excited about. I will say that, on the music front, I forced myself to take a recording class and kind of dive back into that. And, I put a couple songs out on SoundCloud just for fun, just to kind of get through the process. But that's not something I'm, I'd say it's very much a work in progress. The musical front, I don't put the time into it. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not good at asking for pay increases, and I'm not good at self-promotion. So I don't put a ton of time and effort into my LinkedIn profile or Twitter or those kinds of things. So I'm not super active on social from that standpoint.
Fair enough. If you'll share it with us, we'll put that SoundCloud link in the show notes. No pressure there if you don't want to, but happy to share that out with folks. I'd definitely like to take a listen. And that's it. We'll be back next week.
I'm just going to say, you get the most ridiculous intros from me. I like the one that was unsinkable.
Yeah, that was a good one.
What does illustrious mean, though?
Illustrious? I have to look it up. That's on you.
I gotta look it up. Okay. Oh, that's sweet. I just Googled illustrious. I like it. Aw.